What's up, guys? Back in the shop tonight to continue on with our suspension talk. I do a lot of thinking about what's going to go into these videos and how I want to present it. There is a lot of information with all of this kind of stuff, and it's really hard because it's really easy to miss something that might be really crucial, but you also don't want to say too much and then kind of end up with information overload because that's not beneficial either. So I lay awake at night and can't sleep thinking about what I want to say in these videos and all this stuff. And I started thinking about it, and really before we dive into really the nitty-gritty of suspension and specifically for Lincoln stuff, I want you guys to understand how to change your thought process when you're talking about a race truck or when you're thinking about a race truck. It's not a simple 1 + 1 = 2 when it comes to this stuff. Every single component is a variable. It's a simple machine, but at the same time, it's a very complex machine. It's just like one of the laws of physics that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And you really have to think about that when you're thinking about making changes or setting something up or even just picking a combination for your truck. I mean, this doesn't just apply to race trucks. This applies to your street truck too. You've got to think about the turbo that you buy and the converter in your transmission and the injectors and the size of your engine and the weight of your truck and all of these things to pick a combination of parts that really works good together. You can buy the best parts in the world, but if your combination's all screwed up, you really don't have much there. So I want you guys to kind of to think about that. I actually woke up this morning and I was looking at Facebook and I found, and I had seen this before, but it was a little article tidbit about some studies done on aircraft during World War II. And essentially the Allies would look at the planes that made it back from battle that would be all shot up with bullets, and they would look at where they were hit with the bullets, and they were going to try to reinforce those areas because they thought that that was important for the planes to make it back. Well, a mathematician actually stepped in and said, hey, wait a minute, guys. What if the reason that these planes made it back was because where these bullet holes are doesn't matter as much, but the planes that didn't make it back, those were the ones that were shot in the more critical areas. So let's reinforce the areas that aren't hit with bullet holes on the plane. And that is a perfect analogy for race car, just changing the way that you process your data. That's really how you want to look at and approach everything you do. For example, since we're on the suspension topic, if you're talking about what that vehicle is experiencing sitting on the starting line when you let go of the button, these are some of the variables that are in play. The boost and the engine RPM that the engine makes, the way that the boost ramp comes in, if you're running nitrous, the way that your nitrous power comes in, the stall of your converter is going to dictate how much boost you make for a given engine RPM. 20 pounds of boost at 3,000 RPM is not the same as 20 pounds of boost at 3,500 RPM. It's going to react different. It's going to change the way the chassis works. The first gear ratio in your transmission, the rear gear ratio, the size of your tire, the height of your tire, how you have the front four-link set up on a four-wheel drive, how you have the rear four-link set up, your spring rates on your shocks, just the type of shocks that they are and the way that they're valved, the shock settings, the weight, the overall weight of the vehicle, the weight bias of the vehicle, the corner weights of the vehicle, the air pressure in the tire. These are all things that when you let go of the trans brake, every one of those pieces matter. So there could be 15 things that are all playing together for that first, quarter second of the run. And if you get one of them wrong, let's say everything is perfect, working good, you can go 117 to the 60 foot. Well, you get one thing a little bit off, now you go 118. You get another one just a little bit off, now you go 119, 120. You get 4 or 5 things wrong, the truck doesn't move. It won't even make the run. You could be that close to having your combination really good, and 4 or 5 things can be just a little ways off, and boom, the whole run's out the window. Chris Bell at Kinetic Energy, he describes it as if you imagine a bunch of 12 by 12 windows stacked on top of each other, and when all of those windows are in line, you can look right through them. Well, imagine if every one of those windows was a component of the race car like we just discussed, or the race truck, and you slid one window one way. Well, now your field of vision got a little bit smaller. Now you slide a window the other way. Well, now it's even smaller. By the time you slide 4 or 5 of those windows around, now you can't even see through it. You've missed your tune-up. I think that's a great way to look at it, but I think that a better way of looking at it is imagine a dartboard. So, you know, you've got a dartboard with all of the different circles in it. It's easiest to throw a dart and hit it on the outside. The outside's the biggest diameter, so it's easiest. And it's a lot harder to hit the dartboard in the center. So before we get too serious into suspension talk, I drew up a little dartboard drawing, and let's go over that and go from there. All right, so we got my little pie chart here, and I got everything laid out on it. And the largest diameter is the weight and weight bias. So in my opinion, this is the thing that's going to be easiest to throw the dart at the dartboard and nail it. The better weight bias you have, closer to 50-50, and the lighter your vehicle is, the easier it's going to be to set up your 4-link. The less that the boost and engine RPM matters as much, the less the stall speed matters as much. All of these things don't matter quite as much if you have a really good weight bias and you have a light vehicle. If you have a really bad weight bias, like most 4-wheel drive diesel trucks do, this is going to make all of this stuff more important. You're going to have to work a little bit harder. Things are going to be a little bit more challenging, but with all of these things correct, you can still get to the end result. The 4-link and style of suspension, so ladder bar or leaf spring, you would think that would be right in the center. I think that this is the big misconception with 4-link, and this is why I want to talk about this before we jump into suspension more, is this is not the end-all be-all. The 4-link setup is only as good as all of the other components. So really, it's on the broader range of spectrum. In my opinion, all of this stuff is equally important, but this is going to be what I would consider a little bit less important until you understand all of these. Boost and engine RPM are two separate entities, like I discussed before. 20 pounds of boost and 3,000 engine RPM is not the same as 20 pounds of boost and 3,500 engine RPM. If you have a light vehicle, you might want the 3,500 engine RPM because it's going to flash up into the stall speed quicker. Or I'm sorry, going to flash up into the power that it makes quicker. Because your vehicle is lighter, it's not going to make the converter struggle as much for it. But if you have a heavy vehicle, you might want the 20 pounds of boost at 3,000 RPM because the vehicle's heavier. It's going to put more work on the converter. It's going to put more load on it. It's going to have to fluid couple more, and it's going to run over the converter more. And what I mean by that is it's going to make the converter less efficient. So you might want that tighter stall. Boost, engine RPM, and converter stall speed are all directly tied together. Each one of those three things matter. Each one of those three things are going to dictate on the weight and how you have your 4-link set up. Starting line ratio is something I do not see a lot of people talk about, and it is pretty important. Starting line ratio is just a mathematical, it's a fictitious number. It doesn't necessarily correlate with anything, but it gives you a point of reference, and it gives you a direction of which way to go in either way. It's the height of your tire, the first gear ratio in your transmission, and the final gear ratio. If you know all that information, you can hop on to Wallace Racing Calculator and you can put that information in. And I don't want to get into what those numbers mean exactly just yet because this is more of a train of thought video. But you do need to know your starting line ratio so that you can later understand how it affects all of the other things. Spring rates, that is the weight of your coil spring, the rate in which it compresses. The length of a coil spring is really important, and the weight of it is really important. Old school racing thought process is that on a rear spring or a front spring, if you have it, keep it as light as possible. All it has to do is hold up the weight of the vehicle, and that's all its job is. And that might have been true in 1990 when you were bracket racing with 600 horsepower, but in modern race car world, especially in four-wheel drive diesel race car world, that is not true. Spring rate is extremely important. Imagine your spring rate is a lot like your four-link. If you do not get the right weight, if you don't get it in the spectrum, it is making the shock work too hard or not work good enough. So if you have a heavy vehicle and you have too light of a spring on it, and we're back to this weight bias thing again, if you have a heavy vehicle with bad weight bias, like a four-wheel drive diesel truck is, and you scale it out, you might see that you're 70% on the rear, on the front, and you're 30% on the rear. And if you call up a shock company, they're going to tell you, oh yeah, put a 135-pound spring on it. Well, I can tell you what happens when you do that. When you put a 135-pound spring on it, it preloads the crap out of it when that thing has any sort of weight movement. So what I mean is when you let off the trans brake or you let off the foot brake on the starting line, just because the weight bias is bad doesn't mean that that's the weight on the shock on the rear tire. When you launch and you say have a 4,500 pounds truck that's 70% nose heavy, a lot, if not most, of that weight on the front has now been put on the rear. So that shock that was only designed to ever have 1,500, 1,800 pounds on it, that spring on that shock, it now has 3,800 pounds, maybe 4,000 pounds on it. It collapses that shock too quickly. The shock valving does not have time to work properly. Same goes for if you have too heavy of a spring. If it's too heavy, you're not allowing the shock to work enough. It's not compressing, the shock's not doing its job, the tire's going to suffer. And that's why I have shocks and tire as the center bullseye. And when I talk about tire, I don't necessarily mean the manufacturer, I don't necessarily mean the air pressure or any of that stuff, but ultimately, the tire has the final say-so in how fast you can go. The tire is what is experiencing all of what you're trying to do. Something that I learned last year that was really eye-opening for me was I used to be laser focused on four-link. I used to be laser focused on the shocks, and I would leave everything else, alone. Now, obviously, your weight bias you can't change, but I would just be laser focused on all that. Well, what I learned was what's way more important is to watch the tire. Watch how you're loading the tire. Are you hitting the tire too hard? What is the tire doing? All of these components are just a tool to make the tire do what you need to do. And that's where the thought process, that's where this all comes full circle here, is the way that you think about all this stuff. When you can flip it upside down and you can go big picture with it, you can actually get way more detailed with all these little things, because at the end of the day, the tire is all that matters. You're trying to load the tire, make the tire happy, drive the tire out as fast as you can. If you can do all that, you win. So I'm going to stop this one here, guys. I want you guys to go and think about all this. This was kind of a lot to think about in itself, honestly, which is why I don't want to get too long-winded with these videos. So think about all this stuff. If you have a truck that you've already raced, go write all this down. Write what boost you left the line at, what the engine RPM was. Write all of your settings down. Figure out your starting line ratio and see what it ran. What did it 60 foot? What did it go to the 330? And then you can, make changes from there. If you're building a brand new vehicle, be thinking about all this stuff. Be thinking about what's the overall weight going to be? What's the goal of the overall weight? What's the bias looking like? What type of suspension do you have? What's your engine combo going to be? How are you going to run the power management? What are you going to do for a converter stall? you know, what are you going to do for gear ratios? What are you going to do for transmission ratios? What kind of shocks are you going to buy? What kind of tire are you going to run? This is all stuff that doesn't matter if you're racing a truck right now or building one from scratch. 100% this needs to be in your thoughts. So we're going to stop this video here, guys. Go over all this information. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll answer any comment. I'll answer anything you guys want to know. And then on the next one, we will dive more into 4Link stuff. As far as the giveaway goes, I am going to hopefully have that video up after this video in a couple days. So if you guys haven't seen the last video, go check that out. Giving away a swag pack. Drop a comment. Tell me what your guess is that we got for the Fossil. And like always, guys, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.